What if we got through the whole thing and didn't record?
Yeah, I'm looking for my phone because I'm sure it's going to ring it sometime during this.
Do you get tons of emails a day?
Yeah,
Oh my gosh, that'd be
more
awful.
than I need. Well, Betsy, thanks for letting me observe your class, and thanks for your time in having this post-conference. Let's take a few minutes and let's just talk about the lesson. When we had our pre-conference, we talked about what your lesson was going to look like and what your plans were. Let's just talk about going into the lesson. What was your objective? What were you hoping to get done?
That the students would comprehend their books that they picked out individually. They are reading independently, and then for them to learn, examine, and work with new vocabulary words for the new story that we're going to be reading.
Okay. And those vocabulary, the story you were going to read, you read as a class, but each individual has another book as well?
Yes, the story we're going to read as a read aloud, I read to them out loud, so they can hear what a good reader sounds like with the different skills lessons that we've been learning. And then their individual book is the one that they pick out that they want to read on their own.
Okay. So how many books would a student get through in a semester?
In a
9
semester?
weeks?
Well, I have some kids that have gotten through like 20, and I'll have some kids that would just get through one. Depends on how big the book is and how difficult it is and what grade level they're reading at, because majority of them are not reading at grade level, so it depends on.
And you pick the book, or they do?
They pick the book. Yep.
So is it just high interest, low level?
Yep, there's some high interest, low level, there's some moderate, high interest, and there's also some kids that challenge themselves and read more difficult books, but usually it's high interest, usually middle challenge level. It has to be able to challenge them, so they do a 5-finger count when they first pick out a book to make sure the book is not too easy but not too hard, but just right for them. And if the book is just right for them, then that's the book they read, that they like.
Good. And how do you pick the books that you read as a class?
Those stories are ones that either as a program we have found that are at their grade level, or are ones that we got from a couple of our books that we have.
Okay.
But they're all grade level books though, or grade level stories.
Today, as we go through our post-conference, during the pre-conference, we recognized a bunch of standards and criteria that we thought we were going to address during this conference, and after observing your lesson, I think I found most of those being addressed. And so I'll address a few of those strength areas, but then at the end we'll talk about a few areas that maybe we could focus on.
Perfect.
over the next year. So,
Sweet.
reflecting on the lesson, tell me what you think. I know what you hope to get accomplished. Tell me what you think was accomplished during that lesson.
Their ability to identify the new vocabulary words and how to pronounce them, but they can still work with those. So probably the ability to identify the new vocabulary words, which will help them comprehend the read aloud story that I do, and for them to continue to comprehend their own independent reading books.
So how often do you reference the book you're reading as a class? Is that every day, or is
Well, yeah, when we do vocab, it's every day, and then I read one story every 2 weeks. So we meet with them 5 times in 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks, I read the story out loud to them. So, but they're referencing it every time we do the vocab review every day. That is through the stories being referenced.
Okay. How do you think the lesson went?
It was good. I don't think some of them understood some of the words, or they still don't know how to pronounce some of the words, but it went good. I mean, they understand. It's always hard for them to grasp the definition of the word when they first learn it that first day. So that's why it's repetition every time they're in here. We go over it. But the first day, for them being introduced to it, and it went all right.
What didn't go as well as you told?
Probably some of them grasping the comprehension of the vocabulary words, because some of them just didn't understand. Maybe I didn't use a definition or an example that they could relate to, or I didn't use a picture they could relate to, or they just didn't understand it.
Okay. So if you were to reteach this lesson tomorrow, was there anything you would do differently?
Yeah, because after I go through some of my classes, I seem to get better and I use better examples. Sometimes, or I use the same example, but sometimes a student will give me another example that will be a better example to use, or I will find a difference in them that maybe that they all chose on their own that I didn't have up there that really helped them understand the word.
Are there things that you would continue to do?
Yeah, obviously the PowerPoint, because we have to do that, or we have to explain the words, but I like to use examples that they do, especially for movies, because a lot of them have seen current movies. And so I like to use examples from movies or TV shows or some sort of place where they will all be able to connect to it, because that's what helps them remember it.
How do you formatively assess that vocabulary each time? Is it, I'm assuming you take some type of assessment at the end of,
Mm-hmm.
but that day, watching them as you introduce those vocabulary words, what told you they were getting it or not getting it?
Because every time I introduce a new vocab word, because there's 7 total, so after I introduce a new one, then I go back and review the previous ones I just taught. So the first vocab I teach them, when we're on the second one, then I go back and review the first one, then we go to the third vocab word, then we go back and review the first and second one, so they're constantly getting repetitive for about 49 times about I'm going over those words, 7 times, 7 words.
Okay. As we agreed to when we had the pre-conference, I was going to use the selective verbatim technique. I was going to track all the questions that you asked during the lesson, and you have those in front of you as well. I know you probably haven't had a chance to look at them. Let's just take a few minutes and look at the questions. And there were quite a few. I think there's 4 or 5 pages total. Just looking at those questions, would you say that that's a normal class, a typical class that you would ask
Yes.
that many questions?
Yeah, I'm a big question asker.
Okay.
And yeah, usually at the beginning of the day, I always start off by, if someone's not here, I ask if anyone's seen them. We do the bell ringer. I always ask how their day was, how their weekend was. But yeah, usually it is, then I always ask them what page they're on. So these are usually the questions I ask, typically about every day, but then the questions asked during the lesson will obviously be different from lesson to lesson, but majority of them asking every student what page they're on, beginning of the class information, reviewing of the vocab words, was all those questions I usually ask about every day.
Okay. I noticed that your students, there was a very clear and expected routine in your room. Your classroom management is pretty obvious that they know what's expected, they know what to do when they come in. Can you talk to me about what are your expectations when they come in, or with their books or vocab? And I noticed when you mentioned the PowerPoint, they all knew what that meant. They all got to work, asked for the words.
Our class is very structured, so day 1 will look the same today as it will in December, but just with a different story and different vocabulary words and different skills lessons. So we set from the beginning of the school year, they know when they come in they have to do their vocab or their bell ringer, and they know that I will ask them for their ID and their page number that they're on, because I track their page numbers so that at the end of the 2 weeks I make sure they hit that goal for their biweekly reading goal, because it's 40% of their grade. So, and then that helps them reach their quarter goal. They know every day when they walk in here, I'm going to ask them for their page number, and I'm going to make sure they do their bell ringer. And then we usually right after that we get into reading, so I give them 20 minutes to read. So they know, because I run a tight ship. So they know like what they need to do, and then it's all repetitive. So they know vocab, PowerPoint, they know if they want to do it on paper, they know where it's located, they know if they want to do it on PowerPoint, what they need to do, what words they can copy, what they can't. So it's just a lot of repetition.
Another strength area that I noticed was that your lesson was well planned. A block schedule of 90 minutes is a long time, especially with students who are reluctant readers, sophomores who are reluctant readers. Tell me about what goes into planning a 90-minute lesson for reluctant readers.
We like to use different, what's the word? I don't teach, if I can tell they're not understanding it, I will move on, because if they sit there and don't understand it, I keep going on and on, it just gets boring. So I like to have a lot of different transitions. I like to have 3 or 4 transitions, just so that it's something new, that they're getting something different, so that they're constantly engaged and not dwindling out. But I also give them a couple-minute break, because none of us like to sit for 90 minutes, sit and get.
As we looked at the pre-conference, we recognized all the standards that you were going to try to address in the criteria. Here's a copy of all of those standards. Some of those that I found, a number of different areas that were very strong was obviously your classroom management, obviously your planning. Are there some areas, and some of these we couldn't address, some of the ethical things and so on, but talk to me about any of the standards that you think maybe you think we could work on or we could grow from?
Probably just maybe teaching the vocab in a different way, because not all of them are auditory learners or even visuals. Maybe teaching it instead of a PowerPoint, maybe do something different so that they can grasp that concept, I guess, of that. And
what do they do with the PowerPoint? Do they send it? I noticed that they had emailed it to you through Canvas, or so. Then what happens from there? Do they get to review that PowerPoint again and again?
Yep. Usually every day we have a review, just so they're constantly hearing the words, because they see me every other day, so they're not really getting it every day. And then at the end of the 2-week period, we take a vocab test. So then they'll study with a partner, or we'll do some kind of study game before they take the test.
So those are obviously some very strong areas, just classroom management, the preparing for the lesson. The formative assessment that took place, you could tell that you adjusted your lesson as you were asking questions, and you noticed that some kids weren't getting it and some kids were, and used different examples when other students brought some different examples to the table. In looking through the questions, I found a lot of the questions to be maybe fairly low-level questions, maybe recall questions. Is that intentional? Is that not intentional? Or is that something that you think we can look at?
It is intentional, because when I'm asking vocab, I'm just asking for them to basically repeat what the word definition means. So they're very low-level questioning, recall questions. Basically to help them understand it. But I mean, I could probably ask them more difficult questions, but when I'm first introducing the words, I always ask them recall so they can repeat that. But when I bring them back for, when I speak with them on book talks or their individual books, I usually ask them an easier question and all the way up to a more difficult question, or one for them to make an inference on, or they had to predict a sequel, so that I get their higher order thinking.
Okay. I wasn't here to witness that taking place just during the introduction of those 7 vocabulary words. And I thought some questioning techniques to help the student have a deeper understanding of the words could be important. And I know that the first time out, recall does make some sense, but as the 2 weeks go on, some deeper questioning. So I pulled these off, and I'm sure you've seen some of these, and I know they're very hard to pull in during a lesson, especially an introductory lesson, but as you go on, I did notice a couple of vocabulary words you were talking about, a crematorium, and a couple of the kids it just clicked with, because they could reference a movie that they had watched or an experience in their life, but some of the other kids in the class kind of had that look on their face, like, I'm not sure what this means. So I think we all witnessed any type of deeper understanding of the word, the student's more likely to. So just looking at Bloom's taxonomy and the levels of questioning, I do think that you were up to this comprehension level, but the application and the analysis and the synthesis and so on, how can we tie some of those questions into your vocabulary words on a daily basis?
Just maybe having them work with partners, asking them different questions of, that's what I can get better at, as I need to do better, maybe doing partner work after I go over the PowerPoint before they do their, or I go over the PowerPoint before they do their individual PowerPoint, is going over, like maybe quizzing them, to having them give me an example or give me a sentence with the word, but every day when they come in here, when we review the words, instead of asking them just the definition or the synonym, to maybe give them an example or to use the word in a higher order, thinking of like inferencing it or putting themselves in a situation or having them to predict would probably deepen their understanding.
If you were to look at the Iowa assessment scores, would you say inferencing is a skill that most of your students struggle with?
Yes, because a lot of them, they don't have the experience and they have no idea, they can't relate to it. And a lot of students these days don't have the experiences that we had when we were little, and they don't travel a lot. So unless we can give them, they can see it, and we give them those examples, it's hard for them to connect.
Okay. One other possible idea on maybe to help those students with a deeper understanding of the vocabulary is the ability to maybe take it across content areas. Now, I know your story is a story just for your classroom and not necessarily tied into the other departments in the building. Is there any way that you could tie your story into social studies or language arts or math or anything like that?
Yeah, well, it could be tied with history, and I could wait and try to time it more when they go over the Holocaust and World War II. Also, I could also tie it into English when they read the book Night, because they go through a whole, they have a whole curriculum over the book Night. So, and that's what we like. Sometimes we try to do that, and a lot of the skills I try to do when English usually teaches literary elements like plot, settings. I usually try to teach at the same time.